list every single comic ever produced.
Uh-huh.
The reason why I say the market values are not reasonably accurate is because the way the book is compiled is Bob Overstreet, the man who compiles the index each year, does a survey of all the comic shops and comic dealers and whatever around the country and finds out what these people are charging for these specific books. Takes all the totals, adds them together, and finds an average.
Right.
And that varies real widely. You can take a book like, let's say Fantastic Four #1. Fantastic Four will be celebrating their 20th anniversary later on this fall, so their first issue is 20
Already?
years old.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And it can go from anyway to a couple $1,000s to a few hundred, so there's that much of a difference in pricing in books like that. So the guide says it's one price.
Mm-hmm. And at a convention, a comic book convention, do people tote those around and check out?
Yeah, it's still used as a guide, but most dealers or collectors or whatever decide for themselves to use a certain percentage of what the price guide is. Everyone pretty much says that the price guide is prices are overinflated for the most part, so they'll sell their materials at, say 80% guide or 90% guide, so they take the price in the guide and reduce it that much.
Well, let's talk, when we come back, when we take a break, let's talk about what you're paying for comic books and where you can get them.
All right.
More with K.C. Carlson and comic book collections right after this. I'm Jeff Welch, and you're watching 13 Interview, and we're talking about comic books this afternoon, and in my hand I'm holding Justice League of America, which, when you bought it, and I'm not sure when it was, it cost 10 cents. And how much did you pay for this?
I just bought this a week or two ago, and I believe I spent somewhere around $15 for it.
And when was it published? What year?
Let me check real quick here. It's a 1961 issue.
And you $15, this 10-cent comic book. And we probably have a lot of viewers out there who have piles of these things in their attic or in boxes or somewhere, and they're worth money.
Depending. That one's a special case. That's an early issue. That's a #7. It's the 7th in the series.
Very early.
You can see that it's in very good condition. Hasn't been mishandled, and the pages are still reasonably white. Comic books are traditionally printed on the worst possible paper imaginable, so that usually the pages turn yellow after a number of years. But those pages are still reasonably white, and it's in very good condition. A lot of people, I've run into people that said, I've got a box of comics in the attic, why don't you come over and see what it looks like? And I've come over, and they're from families with 2 or 3 brothers and sisters, and by the time they get out of the attic into my hands, they're not in too good a condition. So
do you do that occasionally? People will call you up and say, hey, why don't you take a look through some of my books?
Occasionally, not as much as it used to be, because now everyone's more aware of the value of them.
I suppose you're a really picky collector now that you know what to look for.
Yeah, expensive part of it. The back issue comics are just so expensive for now that I have no trouble keeping up with the new stuff without worrying about buying old issues.
What did you start as a kid? What were you reading?
One of the earliest books I remember reading, I was brought up on the Duck books, Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge, and a book called Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, which is a kind of a comic book classic, combining the best of whatever Walt Disney put out. There was another book that I really finally remember reading when I was young. It was called Sugar and Spike. It was the adventures of 2 little kids, a boy and a girl.
Those. Yes, I remember that.
And they talked in baby talk, and nobody could understand what they were saying, but they communicated in regular English, through thought balloons and whatever. And
boy, that brings back memories. Yeah.
The thing about the series was you never saw their parents; you only saw their feet, because that's the way the kids would see them from.
Did that strip last very long?
It lasted quite a while. It ran for a total of about 110 issues altogether. So I would guess somewhere in the vicinity of 10 years, which is pretty successful for a comic book, because sometimes it doesn't run more than 2 or 3 issues before it's canceled.
What are some of the longer-running comic books? You were saying Richie Rich is very popular.
It's very popular. It's not all that long-running. I believe that Richie Rich was a character from the 60s, but he became so immensely popular that at one time there were at least 27 different comic books bearing his name. such as Richie Rich Dollars and Cents and Richie Rich's Girlfriend and Richie Rich's Robot Maid and just an endless array of them. And he's still a very popular character.
Is he still printing? Is he
yeah,
still out?
he's still dozens and dozens and dozens of Richie Rich comic books out every month.
Well, where do you buy them? I don't know where to buy them.
So I get most of my comics done at Truckers Union here in Eau Claire. That's the closest thing to a comic specialty store there is in Eau Claire. They carry a complete line of Marvel and DC comics. They don't handle too many Archies or Richie Rich for a minute.
Yeah, but if I went to a grocery store, I wouldn't be able to.
It depends. There's a few grocery stores in town that that carry them.
Basically, I'd have to go to Minneapolis or Madison.
Yeah. The co-op carries comics. It's just something you got to look for. They aren't prominently displayed anymore, and it's kind of it's always fun for me when I go to a new town and go into a store to see if I can find them for a long time, because something's real odd, because I could walk into a new store and I could walk straight to the comic books without even thinking about it.
Well, what about kids? You know, kids don't buy comic books anymore, probably.
That may be part of one of the problems the comic book industry is in right now. See, what happened basically is that when we were all kids and we were growing up with the comics were aimed at us. They were more juvenile, and we understood them.
We used to sit on the porch and all the neighbors used to come and we used to read them all just over and over again. Spend summer afternoons just reading comics.
Sure. When I was younger, I think there were like 6 other kids in the neighborhood that collected, and now it's just me. I'm the only one that stayed with it.
You're the only one left. But you don't think they gear the comic books anymore to adolescents or juveniles?
Not anymore. A lot of it is when comic books first started, they were produced by adults and who were just doing it as a business. They were making comic books. And that's not universal. There's a lot of people that did it out of love, and you can tell there's a lot of really good comic book material. But for the most part, it was just it was a publishing enterprise of something to make a buck. But eventually, the kids grew up and they loved these characters, and they grew up, and as they grew up, they wanted to work in comic books, and they wanted to be writers and artists. So these kids that read the comics grew up to draw them and to write them. All the fans became and started working for the companies. And because they became older, the comic books kind of became older with them, and they started more sophisticated storylines and more subplots and just basically more dramatic impact to them, so that comic books grew up with us, and now they're not totally aimed at an adult level, but they're not really aimed at kids anymore either, which is great for us, because they're making comic books that we want to read. But the little kids nowadays, they just don't have anything to read anymore. It's just, Richie Rich is still published, and the Archie books are still around, but for the most part, they aren't real well done, and they don't hold a lot of children's interest anymore.
Comic books have grown up, in other words, with the writers. Saturday morning cartoons, on the other hand, I don't think have grown up.
No, they are slipping very badly, in my opinion, a lot of people's opinion. A lot of that's due to various things happening, cost and expense, for one thing.
They just want to churn them out, 1 week after another.
Animation is very, very expensive to produce. And I believe there's only like 4 or 5 major animation studios doing all the shows that you see on Saturday morning. So
right. Are they DC, and are they connected with some of the comic books?
A few of them are. Marvel Comics, which publishes Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Captain America, and those characters, recently purchased their own animation studio, which is, I believe it's a Japanese animation studio, and the Japanese are doing tremendous things with animation right now. So with Marvel having their own animation studio, we're bound to see a lot of Marvel characters getting their own TV shows in the future. There's a Spider-Man pilot in the works, I know, and I don't know if it's been scheduled for this fall yet.
Oh, yeah. They used to have animation during prime time, the Flintstones, as I recall, and Batman, right? But otherwise, they haven't had too many.
No. Basically, I think the networks are behind that. I guess they don't think that really people are all that interested in animation as such, except in regards to certain characters. You get the Peanuts cartoons, which are very, very popular, and those are on practically once a month now. And
And the cinema world is moving into, you see more and more animation flicks. Ralph Bakshi
right.
has had a new one out, American Pop. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of that?
I had really mixed feelings about it. I liked the animation, but I didn't like the way it was promoted. And Baxi came out and said that, you know, this is the new concept in living animation. And what it was it's a technique called rotoscoping, which takes the animators take their drawings from actual film, so they shoot the film first in live action with people doing the actual movements back and forth. The animators take that film and then more or less trace over the photographs to get the continuity of drawing, so the people's arms move realistically and people walk realistically and all that. And Boxey was saying that it's such a great thing, and more or less, he didn't really come out and say it, but it was implied that it was his technique, and that's not true. Walt Disney used rotoscoping technique way back when Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, his first animated feature.
Which is back, what, in the 30s?
Right, yeah.
Early 30s.
So,
now, didn't he do Fritz the Cat? Is he the same
right.
one?
Mm-hmm.
And The Nine Lives of Fritz the Cat, which were fairly popular.
Cultish. There were, a few people appreciated them. The mass markets didn't really understand what was going on. They were kind of an outgrowth of the underground comics.
More of comic books and comic book collections right after this. I'm Jeff Welch. You're watching 13 Interview. Casey Carlson. Casey Carlson is my guest this afternoon, and we're talking about comic books. And before we left, we were talking about movies and comic books. And Popeye was an interesting movie. It was done by Robert Altman, which was talk about living animation. That was the closest you can get, where they made the characters look like they jumped right out of a comic book. Did you see that?
Right. I enjoyed Popeye. I think I was one of the few people that really did it. We got pretty badly mangled by film critics and whatever, and didn't do too well in the box office. But as a concept, it worked really well. It seriously brought comic character to life. I mean, when you looked at Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall, I mean, you saw Popeye in olive oil.
She was great, and those shoes she wore looked just like, and she go, oh, Popeye.
Oh, right.
Right. That and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is a big summer smash now, is, well, it's based on old movie serials with stupid dialogue. And have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. It, like you said, it's based on the old movie serials, but it has a foothold in comic books, just like Star Wars before it did. And it's the corny dialogue and the twisted plot and back and forth.
Comic books have been branching out into different areas. Right here, I'm holding a Raiders of the Lost Ark comic book. They've got this out already. And what are the movie studios have a connection with the comic book makers? Or?
It kind of goes both ways. That's published by Marvel Comic Books. Marvel pioneered, well, not really pioneered movie adaptations. That was done many, many years ago, but since forgotten for quite a long time. But there's some people working for Marvel Comics that were really interested in doing a Star Wars comic, long before Star Wars became the phenomenon that it did.
Before the movie, right?
Right. So the first 3 issues of the Star Wars comic magazine came out before the film was released. And, well, we all know what happened after the movie was released.
Right.
But since then, Marvel especially has been picking up a lot of movie options and doing comic books based on the movies. And some have been very successful and some have been not so good. They did one of Jaws 2, which wasn't too successful. Also one for Meteor, and that may have had to do with the fact that the films didn't do that well either. But that's kind of a new trend. They're picking up. They've got three comics based on movies out this summer. They got the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Dragon Slayer, and they've got a comics version of the new James Bond film.
Now, this Dragon Slayer movie is just released, I think, this weekend in the Eau Claire area. And how long has this been out here?
This magazine has been out a couple weeks, I believe. Well, that's hard to say because, like I said, I get my comics at Truckers Union, which is more or less a specialty shop. Generally get comic books 2 to 3 weeks earlier than the regular newsstands.
Oh, is that right?
So that magazine would just be hitting the newsstands right now, to tie in with the movie.
Would you consider something like this a promotion for the movie, or is it different with, the dialogue in here? Because you probably haven't seen Dragon Slayer, but
yeah, I've seen
like...
Dragon Slayer.
Oh, yeah?
And I don't know if I'd consider it promotion. They're kind of helping each other out. It's always nice to, when you see a movie, you may have missed a bit of dialogue here, or you didn't understand this part here, and then you can go back to the comic book and read it, just like you can do a novel, the novel version also, and you can pick up things that you missed, and it's kind of a helping thing there. The comic book versions generally have a lot of problems in it because they're written and drawn so far ahead of the finish of the movie that sometimes errors creep in. When Marvel did the first Star Wars movie, a lot of material made it into the comic book that didn't make it into the final cut of the movie.
This one I've never seen before. In fact, you have a lot lot of books here I haven't seen. What is it called?
This Cerebus the Aardvark. That's the same thing as the original artwork I showed you earlier. This is kind of what comic books may be going into. This is an alternative comic produced by a man named Dave Sim in Canada, and it's literally a one-man job. I mean, Sim is the writer, the artist, the inker, the drawer. His wife is the publisher. She provides the money to get the thing going. And that's the most recent issue number 26. It's been going for about 3 years now.
High Society.
Yeah, and what it is, it's a parody of the Conan the Barbarian characters, the big, strong barbarians with the swords and slicing everybody up. And this is Cerebus is an aardvark. He's the only animal in his fictional world, and he's dealing with men and women.
Now that's probably cultish because where do you know to buy something like
that? It's only distributed through the comic specialty stores. You won't see that on a newsstand, whatever.
Is that what's going to happen with the world of comic books? They're going to get more and more specialized?
It may be going that way. For instance, you take your regular comic book that you see on the newsstands now, 32 pages. One of the major comic book companies just recently raised their price to 60 cents.
Things that were a dime when we were kids, 60
right.
cents now. Yeah, you can't expect kids to purchase that.
It's just, yeah, exactly.
Is the work getting better? Is the artwork getting better inside it?
I think so. A lot of people are working hard to make comic books, more vital and more dynamic and whatever, but they think they may be limiting themselves in their format. So they're experimenting with these new formats. The magazines, for instance, alternative publishing, and then alternative distribution. They're not making as much profit as they could be by selling to drugstores and grocery stores, whereas people are now realizing, people that are interested in comics are realizing there's special stores for them. So Marvel Comics, for instance, is trying an experiment in the coming months and releasing some of their books to this direct sales only, and to see what it does to their sales figures, whether or not the general man on the street will miss not seeing the book or will know to go to the special store to get it.
Say there's some viewer out here who wants to join your comic book club. How do they get in touch with you or other comic book freaks?
The best way to do that would be through Truckers Union. The people down there...
That's sort of like a central meeting place.
Yeah, that's kind of our unofficial headquarters.
Right.
And the people down there will get you in touch with me or someone else who would tell you when the next meeting was or whatever. And
okay.
Anyone is welcome to join.
Okay. Thanks so much, Casey, for being on 13 Interview and bringing some of your collection with us. It was interesting. Very curious. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with more 13 Interview. Hope to see you then.